PitchCon with Brad Johnson.
Howdy.
Brad, what's going on, man?
Oh, just watching some PitchCon.
Yeah,
I'm
right?
also a little bit confused about Dylan Cease. I'm willing to admit that maybe he's just one of those guys I don't understand.
I mean, yeah, that sounds about right to me. Like, it's just is the fastball gonna be great? Is the curveball gonna catch up or not?
Yeah, there's always
I
a
don't
few
know.
guys in the league where for all the analysis I can do, I don't understand why they're good. They do it, it works, and I don't know why.
Well, I cannot wait for people to show this clip later at the end of the year of us being so stupid and those guys being so smart. But Brad, tell everybody about yourself and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I write for NBC Sports Edge. That's what we call it now. Uh, so NBC Sports Edge / Roto World, you might know it as. Doing some stuff with LMB trade rumors now. I'm at Baseball A Team on Twitter. I've been writing about fantasy baseball for ages. Today's topic's going to be about daily fantasy, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a second here. And it should be a good 50 minutes. I've realized that I I I don't talk for 50 minutes at a time very often.
Yeah, you'll get used to it. It'll be fine. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for supporting PitchCon here. We're actually over 2,100 now, which is amazing. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope to give another fantastic update at the end of this presentation. So if you haven't contributed yet, please consider doing so. We're doing it to raise money for Feeding America. Half of everything we raise goes to them. So please consider doing that. And don't forget to sign up for prizes. We have over 100 people who have done so already, but I'm sure a lot of people would love to win some free stuff. So go to the prize tab on pitchlist.com/pitchcon and go sign up on the Google form for free to do that. So go ahead and do it. And Brad, take it away.
Yeah. So yeah, we got a lovely PowerPoint today. Uh, Another thing I haven't done since I don't think I've made a PowerPoint since college. Uh, so enjoy. Uh, as I mentioned, this first slide I meant to tell you a bit about myself, but I've already done that. There's one programming note I want to touch before we get started. If this was in season, I'd grab some screenshots, throw them in the slides as examples, so you can kind of see what things look at within the site. It doesn't really work right now. There aren't contests for me to pull screenshots from, so we're just going to move along, and you'll have to picture it in your mind. This is a presentation about doing it the easy way. We're trying to have fun playing DFS, not like just throw in busted entries. We should still be able to design lineups that are pretty good without putting in a ton of effort. I've had some success with this over the years, so I know it's possible. And where I think some of this comes from, I got this Bill Gates quote here, or at least it's attributed to him. I will always choose a lazy person for a difficult job because we will find an easy way to do it. And an old boss told me this probably 2012, 2013, and it resonated with me because on a pretty fundamental level, I'm lazy. I like to cut corners. I'm good at it. The nice word for this is efficient. I'm very efficient. Um, and this quote, it helped me understand that strengths are weaknesses, weaknesses are strengths. You gotta take your traits and try to figure out a way to apply it in a way that profits you. My laziness has adapted me to effectively cut corners. And I mentioned this. I've kind of start off the presentation with this because when it comes to fantasy baseball, I do consider myself a jack of all trades. Uh, they often tell you when you're getting into fantasy writing, pick your own little space that's yours. I've always been a do everything guy. So one of my trades is daily fantasy, and since I cover a bit of everything, I do have to cut corners. It's just something I have to do. So I play lazy DFS. I do it pretty well. I usually make a few bucks each season, which if you play DFS, it's not easy to make money year to year. It's definitely an uphill battle, and we're about to get into why. But the summary of this particular slide is I'm lazy. Rakes suck. DFS, Daily Fantasy, the main sites, they come with a pretty big rake. And what that means, it's the percentage of the pot that the platform takes for itself. The current industry standard is sitting right around 16%, which is batty. It's crazy. I don't know why people put up with it. I'm paid to write and play DFS, so I put up with it because I have other income related to the game. I don't think I'd play if I wasn't like a fantasy baseball analyst. I think I'd just look at this and say it was a bad deal and walk away. Um, Even so, I'm going to continue my presentation. At first, I did want to go through a little bit of basic math. So you got this industry standard 16% rake. You imagine kind of like a basic contest, 10 entries, $10 per entry. We'll say it's winner take all. So if there's no rake, the winner would win $100. With the 16% rake, the winner would get $84. You can estimate your expected value of your entry just by doing the prize pool divided by the number of entries. In this case, with the rake in play, you're looking at $8.40 of expected return for every $10 you put in. So that's just $1.60, poof, gone. You have to be a lot better than the other players to make money playing DFS. Just like by expected conditions. We're going to talk about how to kind of get around that a little bit down the road. But if you're like 20% better than everybody else in your contest, that's giving you slightly better than even expected value for this example, and for really live action, what you're going to see out in the wild. You play 1,000 contests, you expect to win $500. It's not a lot of money. It's not an investment. People will talk about daily fantasy, other like high, you know, high cost type of fantasy games as an investment. And when you see these types of rakes, you have to realize that no, this is not an investable thing. It's just something that's you should be treated as something that's fun to play. As you kind of go up in the scale of what you're playing, so playing for like $100 an entry, $1,000 an entry, you're going to be facing a lot better talent for the most part too. So it's hard to find that scale where you end up making money. Can we win? So I painted a bleak picture. Can we win? Yeah, sure. I know this because I win. I don't win every year, but I win most years. And I'm taking a really lazy approach to it. If I can do it, I'm not trying that hard. You can do it. We do have to pick our battles, and that's what's next. We want to pick the right kind of contests to give ourselves a shot to actually make money. And before we get into building rosters, let's just talk about these contests. There are some kind of like 4 basic types of choices we have. There's these are called cash games. They're small scale contests that only run if they fill, and they can also be head to head. And then there's 50-50s and some variations on 50-50s. These will usually give you something close to twice your entry fee if you win. But if you do very, very well, it's the same as just barely winning. There's equal payouts to everyone. These are great for the websites because they pull in a lot of rake, and the people playing them don't really make a lot of money. You have to win most of the time to expect to have any kind of real return on your time. I will mention at very high buy-in levels, like over $500. Sometimes the sites will have lower rakes, so like 5%, and so that's a level where maybe there is some money to be made if you can find these lower rake contests. I'm a small scale guy. I write about fantasy baseball for a living. That's my job. I don't have like all this money sitting around to play daily fantasy, to be honest. So I keep it small, I keep it fun, and yes, I can't give you too much advice about the large scale buy-in type games. Multi-entry GPPs. These are what the sites put forward front and center. They're their flagship product. And what a GPP is, it means it stands for Guaranteed Prize Pool. Basically, the site's saying they'll pay these prizes even if the contest doesn't fill. It's a way to just put a big number on the number of entries that can be selected without worrying about the contest not filling. And the multi-entry, I think that's self-explanatory. It means you can enter multiple times. Some of them, they're more restrained. You might find some multi-entry games that are just 3 entries. Generally, though, you're looking at 20, 50 entries. And the way to play that, you almost have to be a genius. So you gotta approach it uh, at a point where you're creating you create like a scenario, like a basic scenario, and then you start to build like a meta game around it, where you're hedging and you're hedging and you're hedging some more, and you end up building out these edge cases that you hope to actually turn out to be the winning combination that night, because these edge cases then are they're a little bit weird. They're things that shouldn't overlap with too many other lineups, and that gives you the best chance to actually win a very, very large contest. Uh, it turns meta very fast. I'll be honest. I don't use the kind of tools that you need to do this right, so I've never really gotten my head all the way around it. I've never had any success with a multi-entry approach. I think it's a great way to light money on fire. Uh, you got that 16% rake still, and the sites want you to pay that, 20 times per contest. That's fun for them. The single entry GPPs, these are my Goldilocks contests. This is why I like, and truthfully, they're a lottery, they're a raffle. Uh, you you're basically just putting forward your best play, and the advantage of that is so is everybody else. Even if the best play is something weird, something that's low probability but very unique, uh, that you're only going against that one option from a person. So it it feels to me, and I don't have math on this, but it feels to me that you get more strategic opportunities, more tactical choices when you're designing your lineups. And tend to keep it small too, like I mentioned. You can play as low as 10 cents. I usually, I'll, I'll stay in that, I'll put in a 10-cent entry sometimes, but usually I stay in like the $1 to $5 range, and I'll play for about $12 a day. Uh, And the last type, there's various site-specific offerings. Every site has their own kind of idea of a unique take. There's captain's modes, home run hunts, probably some other ones that I'm forgetting. Uh, I think I suspect there's money to be made at these because the projection tools and the touts don't really talk about them very much. So you can develop a process that might beat uh, the uh, the general field. I haven't really tried. I'm a traditionalist. I really like the base game. It's enjoyable. It's similar to the base fantasy game that I very much enjoy. So I stick there. So I can't offer too much help there. All right, let's talk about building a lineup. Uh, like back in like the foundational days of DFS, 2014. Uh, I think like a lot of the people who came over initially, it's an overlap of people with fantasy knowledge and people with gambling or sports betting knowledge. So my background was fantasy baseball and Texas Hold'em. I tried to apply some basically Hold'em like approaches to it, and one of the things I talked about all the time was I have a process. I trust my process. I'm gonna stick to my process. Uh, I I don't know if that's the approach right now. I think it's kind of the wrong way of looking at it, at least in a single process scenario. Um, you talk about the proverbial cat. There's a lot of ways to skin it, and DFS works the same way. A good low effort casual DFS player will have a bag of tricks, multiple processes, and an instinct on when to use them too. A couple simple examples. You'll probably play very differently on a typical Thursday than a Friday. It's like Thursday, I call it Thin Thursday. It's like usually like a 4 or 5 game slate, uh, very small, very contained, where you can actually see three, four, five different obvious paths to the best roster. Whereas Friday, you got 15 games and feels like anything can happen. And Saturday is a little bit different. You got split contests, 7 games in the afternoon, 7 games at night. Again, it has a different feel. Uh, the excuse me, contest fundamentals, they vary. You also get contests where just because of the way the slate is, you got a ton of aces, or you have a ton of scrubby pitchers. Uh, the stacks aren't there, or maybe they are, and depending on what's there in that slate and the size of the slate, you should approach it differently. And yeah, we're all busy. I mostly play on DraftKings these days. I'm going to talk about this from a DraftKings first perspective. So you notice I'll mention two pitchers a lot, and that's a very DraftKings thing. Um, it's just the platform I like most at this time. I still don't like their 16% rake. I'll take every opportunity to chide them for that. And you could spend hours and hours and hours designing lineups. You can also do it in 5 minutes. I I tend to do it pretty quick because I have other things to do. I have dogs to walk. I have normal fantasy teams to manage, trades to negotiate and execute, articles and fiction to write. I'm doing my things, and honestly, I'm probably less busy than you. I'm less busy than most people, and I feel like I don't have time to drop hours into TFS construction on a daily basis. Uh, a caveat. Uh, it's hard to say how much research goes into what I'm doing before I pick my players, and that's because I've usually written one or two daily fantasy articles already by the time I even go about selecting my personal rosters. So while I do spend 5 or 10 minutes usually, and the same on my off days too, I don't know like how much of that is based on research that I've internalized over years of doing this and writing about it. In brief, it might take you longer initially to get to that level. Value versus popularity. You want to find players with value. We're looking for players who project to outperform their price point. Uh, Speaking generally, you got a guy who costs $3,000. He projects to be worth $4,000. That's good. Uh, the more value you find, generally the better odds you have of constructing a winning roster. The other thing though is popularity. It's not so good. You want guys who aren't very common, because if they do well and the common guys don't do well, it's a easier path to a victory. The problem here is that value and popularity usually go hand in hand. Uh, it's not that hard for the most part to see when Mike Trout's underpriced. It's not that hard even to see when DJ LeMahieu's underpriced or some nobody who's suddenly batting cleanup. Uh, when you have players who are obviously underpriced, they're popular. So the key to me really is trying to develop a unique analysis to find values who aren't recognized as such, values who are concealed. And I'd love to give you like just a static methodology for how I do that, but it has to be living. It has to constantly adapt because we're dealing with something that has meta games, and you have to try to identify the meta game and then go a little bit contrary to it. Uh, it, it it's a soft and fuzzy feeling too, and so it's hard to teach. It's basically an instinct, and uh, once you play enough, I think you'll develop your own instincts. Uh, I, I guess what I'm saying is you want to try to find values who are values but don't appear to be a value, and sometimes you have to get away from a purely objective approach to do that. I know we're fantasy baseball analysts. We're sabermetrically inclined for the most part, and so walking towards subjective analysis types is a little icky feeling. Uh, I, I find it's profitable. I think you got to find some analysis points that aren't uh, part of convention. I use three basic starting points when building a lineup, uh, and the reason I do this, it's a time cut. It makes it easier to get through building a lineup without just getting in my own head trying to be galaxy brain when that's not really necessary. And to decide which of these foundations I use, it's good to be mindful of what's leveraged on that day. And by leveraged, I mean you should try to identify the most challenging part of the roster to solve for that particular slate. And it does vary, as I mentioned, based on contest fundamentals. Excuse me. All right, so first one, pretty obvious. Double pitchers. There's just some days where I know there are a couple specific pitchers I want to use. I don't want to use the other guys. They suck, or they're overpriced, or they're too popular. And I have my two targets. So I'll just pop them on my roster, and I'll proceed to the offense, and I'll figure out what kind of offense works from there. Uh, Other days, I don't care what pitchers I use. Maybe there's uh, everyone's pretty well priced, and so I can go cheap, I can go expensive, and I'll feel good about it either way. And on those days, I'll save pitchers for last. Uh, I made a note here. The guys are comfortable using it. It doesn't always mean that they're good players. For example, if Corbin Burns is going to be 75% rostered because he's the guy in the slate, you're probably not going to be that happy using him. You might still use him because that's it happens that sometimes it's too painful to switch from Corbin Burns to Jordan Lyles and I don't know, Vince Velasquez. That hurts, but you're not going to feel too good about using Corbin Burns when everyone else is too. It's kind of throwing away a pick. Stacks are like basic DFS 101. It's a collection of players from the same team, and they're useful because their performance is correlated. Aaron Judge homers, there's a good chance DJ LeMahieu is on base, he gets driven in. So that run in RBI is double counted. But also, the real reason you want this is because you pick an Astro stack, they tear Jordan Lyles apart. And then they get to face really scrubby mop-up relievers, and they tear them apart too. You want these interactive network effects to build and expound on each other, and that's how you get a good stack. You get some guys dropping huge numbers in a given day. It's a very mathematically effective tactic. It's also very conventional, so you have to be careful about doing things that are just too popular. Um, The third way I'll start a lineup is just by looking for specific targets. So if in my preparation I find some guys who I think are really good values, they might be unpopular, uh, I'll usually just throw them in the lineup first, and then I'll figure out what I'm doing around them. If there's a stack I want to use that makes sense, if I want to then maybe pick some pitchers, well, I can start with the big values that I'm confident are really good for that slate, and then figure things out. So usually on a given platform, there are going to be a few guys who are excuse me, mouth's getting dry. All right. There's usually going to be a few guys who are underestimated. So they're just underpriced. They stay underpriced for a while. It's just something about the model that site's using. And you can ride them for a while. They'll eventually become popular, and then price goes way up. A few guys who come to mind from last year. Austin Riley took a while for the price to catch up. Jonathan India had a few runs that were just great. Jorge Polanco was the top value for ages, and he wasn't unpopular, but nobody really jumped in, with both feet. At least the marketplace didn't. Willie Adames, similar situation once you joined the Brewers. Even Paul Goldschmidt, big name, but he sometimes with these veteran guys, their prices are such that they don't fit in the top tier of player, and they don't fit in the lower tier, and so they kind of exist in a middle space where they're not being picked up. Uh, all these guys had really profitable periods for me last season. I was using them on a daily basis. They made me money. Anyone who's read my columns knows that when I find these guys, I'll recommend them day after day, and it gets very repetitive. But when a guy's a good value, a guy's a good value. Big wins. So we talked about liking these lottery raffle type single entry GPPs. They're an attractive contest type to me. Uh, the problem with GPPs is that the prize pool skews very heavily towards the top few places. And I mean, if you've played large poker tournaments, it's the same thing. Uh, GPPs do skew a little bit more, I find. They want to be able to advertise a very big top prize, and so they're a little stingier to the people who just kind of barely squeak into the money. To make a substantial amount of money in a season, you want multiple top five finishes over the course of a year. Uh, there are ways to improve your odds of these big wins. The problem with most of these methods is they also actively hurt your odds of performing well on a given day. So you got trade-offs to make. You're lowering your chance to cash in exchange for a better shot to outright win. Personally, I'm happier cashing more often. I don't try very hard to chase the outright wins. Uh, I take an approach to reach the money, hope that I just happen to have picked the nuts for that day, and then it'll work out. And I'll get in a few moments. I'll get into some reasons why caching more often and using strategies that cache more often is helpful for designing your process too. Um, Related to that slide, don't be a tryhard. It's just a little follow-up point on chasing the outright win rather than the uh, the easy money, the cash. A tryhard is someone who tries to apply an advanced technique that they've learned from like a guide or a tutorial in a very amateur way. In DFS, it's a good way to lose money. Uh, by all means, play around with new ideas. I don't mean to just like pick your one technique and stick to it, but at the same time, you don't really want to fall into the try hard trap either. So I left a few bullets. Play within yourself. Lean on what you know. Try to expand incrementally from what you know, and then while you're dabbling with new ideas, be careful about not overcommitting to them. Uh, and Yeah. So, what do winning lineups look like? I've made a fun 2x2 table. Uh, Popularity and conventionality are the two characteristics I'm looking at. It's very reductionist to say that winning is based on these two characteristics, but what I'm basically getting at is well, I'll show you. Let's just talk through each of these quadrants. So the popular and the conventional lineup. We're talking about your Corbin Burns, your Blue Jay stack, and you picked Ryan Jeffers. He hit 2 home runs. This is your lowest volatility approach. It's a good way to pick up cheap wins in the sense that you can double or quadruple up with pretty good regularity. Uh, you, you still have that sight rake leaning over your shoulder, and doubling up means that you can play 2 more days free. It's not it's not a great result. It's an acceptable result. The rakes will still eat into you pretty fast. And You might notice I mentioned a double dinger from Ryan Jeffers as part of that example. It seemingly goes against the popular slash conventional idea. Um, he you might consider him to be probably unpopular and unconventional. I really like bad, like I shouldn't say bad. Powerful catchers with low price points is actually a pretty conventional approach, but also using a stack, good pitchers, and just a couple minimum price guys with home run chances. That's also very conventional. So Ryan Jeffers might seem like someone you didn't want to use, but it's a typical way of designing a roster. The other extreme is unpopular and unconventional. This is a really good way to lose like 20 times in a row. Uh, so usually what this will look like, you got a bunch of guys, 3 to 7% rostered. You might even leave some money on the table because you're picking guys who aren't popular. You're going to find yourself with a lot of like Andrew Velasquez, Nick Maton. The upshot is if you spike it, you won't be overlapping with anyone else. And if you just pay attention to people who win GPPs, the winning roster, you're going to see this roster win every like 10th or 12th time, and it's going to make you think that's a good idea, especially in multi-entry type contests. These rosters come up more often. As I was saying, it's going to make you think it's a good idea. If you want to try it, I recommend waiting for those smaller slates, the 4 to 5 game ones. The smaller the slate, the likelier the obvious plays all brick. Uh, if you're in a 15 game slate and the Blue Jays and the Astros don't do anything, the Phillies probably did something. The Mets, someone did something that wasn't that like wild and crazy. So your goofy, you know, scrubby guys that you threw together because no one's going to have them, they still have things to compete against. I I really don't use this method. It's hard to make it work. Let's switch over to popular and unconventional. It just means you're using common players in unusual ways, and I like this. It's fun. It lets you kind of test and like expand your approach without being like too wacky, too out there. So, for example, it usually shouldn't be popular to field like the top stack of the day, Mike Trout and Fernando Tatis in the same lineup. You shouldn't be able to do it. Uh, but if you find the right minimum price guys and obviously minimum price pitching too, you might manage to make a unique lineup that also projects to be up there as a live entry. The EV on that roster is good, so that's something you can try. Even though the guys are all going to look high ownership, that combination of high ownership is going to be rare. Uh, a similar example, let's say you got Chris Bubich in a slate. He's minimum priced. He's facing the White Sox. That Chicago stack is considered the best in the slate. They're popular. Nobody's using Bubich and the White Sox. Really, no one's using Bubich, but no one's using both of them together. And since Bubich is cheap, you can profit if he throws 5 innings, strikeouts. You get 6 strikeouts, maybe he allows 3 solo home runs. That would be a great outing. And then the Sox can still eat the Royals mop-up men, and you end up with a passable pitcher, a stack that popped. It's an unconventional route to using popular players. I don't love using pitchers against my hitters. I try to avoid that because math. Uh, but it is that weird opportunity that can work on rare occasions. Last quadrant, unpopular and conventional. So this is you're taking conventional approaches, unpopular players, using a stack against Max Scherzer. That would count as an example. Another version of this is when you see good players who are overpriced. Sometimes you'll notice Whit Merrifield is $1,000 more than Mike Trout. That's nonsense. There's almost no scenario Whit Merrifield is better than Mike Trout. Absent price, I would take Mike Trout against Max Scherzer over Whit Merrifield against any terrible major league pitcher. I just prefer Trout anytime. But if you see that Merrifield costs more than Trout, he's going to be unpopular that day. If you can find the money to sneak him into your lineup and he does well, he leads his position, maybe that can be a really good outcome for you. On the pitching side, maybe Robbie Ray or some big name that costs $4,000 more than Sandy Alcantara. They have similar matchups. It seems like you should be using Alcantara, but because Ray is obviously so much more expensive than him on that day, it actually presents a bit of an opportunity. To this point, I haven't been too explicit about how to actually reduce our effort. I've just been talking through DFS. So let's talk about how to quickly build lineups. And the first thing I recommend, one lineup. Just stick to one lineup. And this isn't for strategic purposes. It's purely to save time. However many contests you play, you can have one lineup. Stick with it. Once you've built it, you can export it with a single click. And for me, the exception is when I find like there's two similarly priced players who I just can't decide between. I'd say this happens to me like maybe twice a month. Uh, you can use two lineups, kind of balance the your exposure, split the entries, and have only this one difference. And that if you won't end up with that regret that you made the wrong choice at the end of the day. Again, that's not a strategic thing. That's just me trying to reduce my effort. Uh, if you have a tool like SaberSim or the Bat, something that's feeding you projections, feeding you lineup optimization. I don't like using uh, tools to optimize lineups for me. I don't even look at that. But if that's your starting point, that's a way to complete research without really even opening your DFS platform. Uh, those tools, they cost money. They're very good. I like them, but they do cost money, and I'm kind of advocating a low cost, low exposure, maybe you win $50 in a year approach to DFS, in which case you might want to just wing it rather than paying for a projection system. But even if that's the case, do as much of your research as you can outside of the DFS platform. Uh, for one, the data that they show you in the platform, it's very short term, very recent, and I'll get into recency bias in a second here. Uh, but it's not really helpful for building knowledge and internalizing knowledge so that you can act faster and faster as you increase your experience and become more familiar with the game. So make a portion of your process about just building fantasy knowledge. Learn about weather patterns at various parks, how different uh, conditions affect the game. Look at your daily matchups, your projected lineups, all this stuff. Look your player analysis. Look at it outside of the DFS platform, and then go in there and start trying to build your lineup. I find that when I do that, it offers me more clarity. I go in with a better idea of what's good on that day, and then I can react to the prices. I can look at them and not view them as the starting point, but rather as secondary to my process. I think that's helpful because everyone else is coming from a value first perspective. So if your first priority is not just pure value, it gives you a slight edge, a slight uniqueness to what you're doing. Uh, Again, once you've done that, use one of the 3 starting builds I mentioned. When in doubt, use a stack. That's just a good tip. uh, Sometimes you'll get 7, 8 players into a lineup, and you're clicking through the second baseman, and you're just not finding it, and you realize it's not really working right. Scrap the whole thing, start over. You might end up with something similar to what you had the first time, but just try a different starting point, see where it takes you. I think one thing that people it's hard to grasp is that all of these this is we're playing baseball. I'm specifically talking about DFS baseball, and we know that anything can happen in baseball. All these guys are numbers. It's like you're playing Powerball. It's a 54, an 18, and a 24. That's all you're really picking at the end of the day, and it feels like you're doing something a lot more intentional than that. Uh, at, and at a surface level, you are, but uh, don't get too hung up with worrying about if your other way of building the lineup might have been better that day. It's more about trying to do things smart, and I try to put out of my mind the alternatives I thought about, because that'll only drive you insane. Misc tips and tricks. I have some stray thoughts that didn't fit into the main bundle of the presentation. Leaving money on the table as a strategy. So normal DFS contests, they'll give you some budget, $50,000. You get to spend it on some number of players, and you're intended to use it all. If you don't use it all, it feels pretty inefficient. You don't have to spend it all though, and almost everybody does. So when you're looking for a unique build, if you can design a lineup that leaves $2,000 on the table that projects to be the same as a lineup that, like, the best lineup that you can make that doesn't do that, you're probably doing something a little bit unique again. Certain slates offer opportunities that it's just kind of like how they're designed, how players are priced, that let you do this without sacrificing points. I find this comes up like half a dozen times in April, and then like maybe once a month after that. And I don't do it every time that comes up. It's just, uh, I mean, you see the last bullet point. It's usually a very dumb idea. One time when it can make sense, especially opening day type contests, like these like truly massive GPPs that have hundreds of thousands of entries, that's a situation where it can make sense to do something that's intentionally stupid. I think that's the best way to put it. It's you're trying to just twist your lineup in a way that uh, no one else will have done, but without like intentionally also picking bad players like that example of Andrew Velasquez and Nick Maton. I don't like going down that path. I'd rather leave money on the table if it's a choice between the two. I'd rather not do either. Recency bias. DFS players very prone to recency bias. Uh, this is something we can exploit, and I highly recommend doing this. Uh, I am 100% certain hot and cold streaks are a real thing. I don't think you can play any kind of competitive baseball and not believe in hot and cold streaks. It's just you have these mechanical funks you can get into, or you found new mechanics that work. Uh, Injuries that are just like small and nagging pop up and then they heal. Um, there's situations where, especially Major League Baseball, they have a scouting report on a guy, there's a book on him, and he makes an adjustment that exploits what used to be his weakness. So pitchers for another 85 plate appearances keep busting him inside. He's mashing that pitch now. Uh, these things happen; they're real. Just as cold streaks happen, they're real. Uh, what I'm equally convinced of, though, is that as outsiders, we can't really we can't identify these well. We're not good at it. We're a little bit better now that we have Statcast, but we're still bad at it. We're mostly going to fail. And the way most DFS players cope with this, they seem to consider all hot seeming players as hot and all cold seeming players as cold. Uh, where you can eke out an advantage is by trying to use guys who are cold when there's no apparent explanation, or even when the data seems to suggest that they're snake bit rather than actually cold. Giancarlo Stanton's a good example. You see him go 0 for 20, 0 for 28. He's struggling, but his exit velocities, he's got like a 117 in there. His average is 93. He's still primed to drop a triple dinger any day, but when he's got a little bit of offer going, all of a sudden people flock out of their Giancarlo shares, and you can flock in at that point and possibly pick up a huge profit. Weather. I'm going to put you right at this guy, Kevin Roth. I don't actually know him, just as a Twitter handle, really. He's a Roto Grinders resource, fantastic. He he's going to give you all the information you need about weather on a given day. And one of the things he'll point out is when a game that's at rain risk is something you might want to target in a GPP versus when you don't want to. These games that have like a 10% chance of being rained out, a 20% chance, people get very wary. They go away from that game. And rightfully so, you don't want anyone to zero out. But at the same time, if that game happens, and even better, if one of the teams dominates, you can end up making a lot of money on that. And remember, too, it's not just the rain and the wind. I think most of us understand this by now. We've gotten to a point where we understand temperature, humidity. These are huge factors on extra base hits and home runs. And wind. Wind can be a trap at some parks. Especially the ones that are more of a bowl-shaped design, or they have high walls that are blocking the wind. These there's a lot of parks that swirl, so maybe the wind's blowing out the left field according to the weather vane, but at the field level, the wind's kind of blowing into shortstop, it's rolling across to right field. You're not getting a pure effect. One park, and this is another one. It's pretty obvious. I think everyone knows this. It's kind of like the use hitters at Coors Field. Pay attention to the wind at Wrigley Field. Uh, there's days it's 25 miles and straight out to center field and everything flies. There's days when the opposite is true and everything falls in the park. And so there's advantages to be found there. Everyone knows about it. It's a very conventional trick. So just be mindful of it and try to incorporate it into your pricing. Umpires. Umpires are important. I have not found a way to incorporate umpires in a low effort way. Uh, I'm not denying their importance. They're a piece of information that's it's kind of like knowing that a stadium's hot and dry on a given day. It has a large effect on or shouldn't say large. It has an effect on the outcomes that happen. Some umpires are just very pitcher friendly. Some umpires are very hitter friendly. The guys in the middle, they don't matter as much on a game to game basis, but the ones at the extremes do have an impact on the game. It's a lot of work uh, to bring that information into your process for what I consider to be a pretty marginal sliver of the pie. Vegas size or Vegas odds. I'm a baseball guy. I'm more of a scout than a gambler. You can quote Vegas odds at me all day. Go away. I don't care. They can piss off as far as I'm concerned. Uh, Feel free to incorporate them into your process. They're useful information. I don't deny that. I consider ignoring them to be a strength of my process and analysis. I have had picks that Vegas does not like. Uh, I have picked against things Vegas does like, and I've made profit from it, and vice versa too. There's times when I must be missing something, and the Vegas line's 10.5. I think the game's going to be a low scoring affair, and it's a high scoring affair, and happens often enough that I'm willing to say, sometimes I miss things. I think sometimes Vegas has, you know, uh, the lines incorporate a number of biases that can be exploited. Let's talk quickly about projection tools. They save a lot of time. That's the the main draw for me. It's also nice to get simple projections for the day. Uh, uh, get results where you don't have to worry about running a lot of numbers yourself. Um, I'm partial particularly to two. One's called SaberSim. The other one's called the Bat. SaberSim, you find it on Fangraphs a bit. It's based on the Steamer projection system. The Bat is Derek Carty's child. They're both quite sophisticated. They both cost a fair amount of money, especially if you're playing the way I've laid out, where you're keeping it a little low stakes. I mentioned this before. I think you might not think they're worth the investment. I recommend considering, ponying up for one of them. Especially the Bat has a lot of tools associated with it. You can learn a lot about DFS just using it for a season, and even if you're not like needing those projections on a day-to-day basis the way you play, just buying the tool, using it for a year, it's going to teach you a lot. It's going to set you back like $300-400 too. But I think you're going to learn a lot. You're going to teach yourself a lot from trying these tools. Uh, Last slide. We're running a little ahead of schedule. I've probably been talking a bit fast, but last slide. Find a community. So I think it's more fun to play with friends. I like taking money from strangers. Poker is kind of the same way. Like I like playing poker with my friends. I like taking money from strangers. So DFS is a bit like that. Uh, you can avoid rakes from the sites by making a league, playing on one of these sites, DraftKings or whatnot, and then you just have someone play the banker, someone you trust, ostensibly. And there's various ways to set up these contests. I, I don't know if DraftKings wants you to do it, but they have this league mode, and it's kind of set up. Wink, wink. It seems like they've designed it to draw people in, even if they're not spending money on their site. Um, if you want to DM me on Twitter, I can talk to you more about it, where I've seen it in the wild a little bit more. And then I also run what I call the Daily Grind Invitational. I've been writing my Daily Grind column since I think 2012. It started off as a streaming column, switched over to both for a while. Now it's purely DFS. And I run the Invitational out of it too. It's a $2 a day. Every day you can come show up or not, and play with some similar minded DFS folk. It's a lot of fun, and like I said, playing with friends is a lot of fun. Get a group together, and you'll have more fun that way. The end. Uh, Thanks to Nick and the Pitcherless community for having me. I know we got like 10 minutes left, and I did earlier in the week. I teased a little thing I wanted to talk about. I mentioned I'm a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to fantasy. And on the opposite side of daily fantasy is dynasty fantasy. So I have a little announcement. You can take it with a grain of salt or not. I'm going to say the era of prospects is dead. And what I mean by this, it's not that prospects are no longer valuable or useful, but I'll back up a step even. I've always, when I talk about dynasty baseball, I've often advised what I call a never rebuild approach. So you're taking your players who are your prospects, you develop them to a point where they're valuable, and you trade them for mid-career major leaguers. You do the same as your guys are getting older, 30, 31 age. You convert them back into younger guys, and the ability to do this over time has, at least in the leagues I play, it's narrowed. It's a lot harder to make these types of trades. I ran a Twitter poll with some thousand responses, and they're telling me that it's also the Twitter at large is having the same experience. So I think folks are more savvy. The other thing is, I think we're getting a lot better at analyzing players and prospects. So we have less room to disagree about what a guy is. There's less extremes about our opinions on certain players, and so the problem with that is it's a little bit harder to find some of these trades taking from the edges of your roster and putting them into peak performance type players. That is my dynasty announcement. The era of prospects is dead. Now I think I have time to take questions. So I'll take a look at the stream chat, and if anyone wants to ask anything, I can talk about it.
Here we go. I'm not mute anymore. Hey,
Oh,
great
nice.
job, man. That was awesome. I am terrible at DFS because I just don't play it like you. I would say, I mean, yeah, please, everybody, by the way, leave your questions for Brad now. I'm sure a lot of people here play a lot of DFS, have some questions. Maybe we're trying to get into it, all that kind of stuff. I love that you showed the 4 boxes there, the unconventional and the unpopular. And I think that is something that gets lost a little bit, is the idea that, yeah, it's the Toronto offense, and then, oh, there's I don't know, the Marlins offense. But there'll be games that the Marlins offense is great all of a sudden, and there are games that the Jays are really bad. And there is this idea of that everyone is not going to touch them. So if you actually go after it, like, what's the chance? Is it like a 10% chance? Is it a 20% chance or whatever that one of those bad teams will actually do well on a given night?
Yeah,
It's
and I don't know
interesting.
if the chances that high usually, at least. So like you have to find these stacks that not only uh, do well but also outperform, and specifically with the players they end up using. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of variables at play, and that's what makes DFS hard. If it wasn't so many variables at play, we'd have solved for X, and it wouldn't
Right.
be a fun game.
No, that would be terrible. My God. But yeah, I mean, the era of prospects being over. And I mean, is that just more of like, I mean, I totally get what you're saying. It's the idea that like the sleeper has been dead for about like 5, 10 years now, right? Because when we didn't have information, all of a sudden there's a guy that played for a month last year, and all of a sudden everyone's like, "What? Who's that?" It's kind of the same way with prospects. There's different levels we still have to go, I think, with our prospect research.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, how many
There,
times,
there's
Brad, have you
there's
looked up an article trying to be like, what was his velocity? You know?
Yeah, there's a lot of information that's black boxed, and
Right.
even like I have some scouting resources that I can turn to and get some Statcast data on a guy, or those velocity readings. But I don't like to push on them too often, because
Right.
I'm getting it for fantasy baseball purposes. They know that,
Yeah.
and you gotta make your plays high leverage.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, let's see. We have some questions here. Stav 8818 asks, "Do you have an example of some of the quote subjective feels that lead you to find undervalued plays?"
Sure. And I actually saw Alex Chamberlain online turning this a little bit more objective the other day. Uh, I One of my go-tos is looking for ground ball hitters against fly ball hitters, and vice versa.
Huh.
Uh, the theory, and I usually don't do too much too sticky of math, but the theory involved is guys with low launch angles in general, when they're swinging at high pitches, they're going to have higher launch angles, and that's going to lead them into more of those line drive and home run type outcomes. And again, vice versa. Guys who tend to create a lot of loft, they usually want the ball low in the zone.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay. Cool. We got some more stuff here. Okay, we have some huge one here. Oh my god. From Great Co 13. Can I even fit this? If it's to play on FanDuel, because to your point of being efficient, I find that picking one pitcher versus two is a huge deal in terms of time needed to set up the lineup. Yeah, right. You're doing a casual DFS as your thing here. The second pitcher just increases the permutations exponentially and end up with a paralysis by analysis. And you might say, you do you, but any reaction to that? No, there's more.
uh, I definitely, I see where you're coming from. It does obviously massively increase the permutations involved.
Right.
I I kind of shrug it away, to be honest. Like I made a point at one, I forget which slide, but I made a point of just saying, like, these guys at the end of the day, you think they're people, you think they're a specific story that you're building, but it's just a lottery ticket. It's a number on a lottery ticket, and if you're finding yourself in that paralysis stage, just remember that these guys are numbers on a lottery ticket, and
Right. Sure.
that hopefully will help you get through that feeling. But if not, if you just can't get through it, simpler platforms like FanDuel, where you only have the one pitcher, that's one way of
Never,
dealing with
never
it.
one pitcher. Can it just be like 5 pitchers?
Yeah,
That would
you
be
need
my
to make a
ideal one.
pitcherless DFS that's just pitchers.
Right? Yeah, it's called the pitcher list of the day, right? Very simple stuff. We got a very quick one here. Big John Empire asks, "Where is your daily grind invitational hosted?"
That's a good question. I probably should have mentioned I have a Patreon these days where I'm running the daily grind out of. I'm hoping to find a home for it at some point. It's been a couple weird years. It used to be on Fangraphs. I haven't worked with Fangraphs since COVID. Maybe I'll be back there at some
Hey,
point
me and
and
you
it can
both.
return. Maybe I'll find another site. Maybe it's Pitcher List.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's on my Patreon right now. It's just patreon.com/baseball A team. I also tweet it out most days, at least early in the season. And then once you're in, I also I'll invite people through the DraftKings app.
Yeah, one day we'll realize like, oh yeah, 16% rate. If we had a 10%, would everybody come?
I I mean, even 10% is a lot, but
Well, right.
after a few years at 16%, I would be happy with 10. I don't see why a site couldn't be profitable with 5. I
Yeah, but
know
there's
they are
more
paying
money
a
to be
lot of
made
like
at 16%, Brad.
I know the sites basically have to pay bribes to every state that they operate in, so that's where a lot of their operating costs come from. But
I
then you
am
also see
not
a
going to
DraftKings
continue
ad
that
every.
conversation.
Yeah, you see a
I
DraftKings ad every commercial break. It's like, yeah, you could just advertise less too.
well, okay, so I not to spoil lots of things too. You're talking about kind of two areas of like where you get your information to help and where you can, and what places like information just based on just any kind of research, then also specifically DFS stuff. I may have something to talk about soon about those things too,
All
if
right.
you're looking for another place.